So today I want to talk about the a sexual exploitation case that's very interesting because it brings up a lot of other issues that I think we are wrestling with as a society right now, including the nature of abuse, including how savvy students are online, children are online, and what ages are actually online and why they're online. And the studies do kind of they're a little varied, but essentially they agreed that somewhere around 12% of the traffic on online dating sites involve children younger than 18, about 12%, and even down as low as 8 to 12. However, um, that is a little bit fluid, a little ooky. And I don't play with the numbers here. I'm just looking at a lot of different studies, and there's a lot kind of going through my head as to how to get my head wrapped around this because there are so many numbers, and we are told constantly that these numbers reflect exploitation. So I want to tell several stories here that all I hope will line up here toward the end so that we can see exactly how these complex relationships online actually play out. We do know that there are some children online. We do know that some of them are there because they're curious, they're LGBTQ. We know some like to pretend to be older personas. And that makes perfect sense because we know that younger children like to pretend like they're older. They like to put themselves in those positions. They dream of being older. They see older people as having all these rights and all this fun and all this interesting lifestyles, and they want to be part of that too. They also have questions. They have questions about their sexuality. They have questions about um, relationships, and they all think that good romantic relationship is the key to happiness. Well, let's talk about how some of these relationships play out. So, in August of last year, the Smyth County, Virginia, this is in the western part of the state, vice chair of the school board got in trouble. He got arrested because he had had a long term relationship with a number of boys of various ages, and I think some girls too, where he was basically sending them money for nudes. He encountered them on gaming platforms and other places. He engaged them. And again, I should say that I'm getting most of these details from the articles I'm about to show you, but he engaged them in the um, platforms. And again, I'm gleaning some details too. I'm hesitating because we're relying totally on these articles, and we don't know how accurate the articles actually are because they come from the police. And of course, the police have their own agendas as they're going forward with it. And what we find out is very often when we dig into the details, it's not quite what the police say, but they're doing their job. They're trying to uh, bring people up on charges, and those charges then go to prosecutors, and prosecutors are paid to prosecute, not to let people off. So here are the basic details, all right? In this online arena, where we know children are at times, and younger generations much more savvy online, we all see the 3-year-olds playing with phones and everything. They get very good at this kind of thing. And we know that young people are trying to get their needs met, whether it is their questions understood or engaging in some adult who's going to talk to them sexually so that they understand some things, that they have questions. Um, but it brings into the focus the nature of abuse, the nature of relationships, the nature of online relationships, what children are really doing there, how much they're being exploited, and what sort of arrangements are actually being made. So what happened with this Smyth County school board chair is essentially he was paying for nudes, and he paid quite a lot of money for the nudes. Okay, in effect, what he was doing is, quite well, not exactly what any of us would want, but he was doing something quite um, transactional, let's say. Okay, so I'm going to bring up the article here, and I think I have it up here. Former Smyth County School Board Chairman Later on, other articles say vice chairman. That's what I mean about the details. We can't be certain exactly on every little thing. He pleads guilty in child exploitation case. So between August and October, apparently, he pled guilty to 4 particular charges. But this is what's interesting. Mr. Todd Stewart Williams, 54 of Chilliwack, entered a guilty plea in federal court in Abingdon. This is in the very narrow area near Wise, Virginia, what I call the pointy part of the pie. According to the DOJ, he spent more than 10 grand to entice a minimum of 6 minors into sending him nude images and sexually explicit videos. Well, why would minors do this? Well, apparently it was a transaction. Now, of course, they put all the burden onto the man, and maybe that's exactly right. But here we have a 15-year-old teenager in Oklahoma who reported to the FBI that Williams requested nude images and videos via Snapchat. By the way, Snapchat users out there, don't think that they can't trace you. Don't think that these images disappear. I've heard this and read about this where Snapchat will just, they use it because their images disappear. Not so. Snapchat can maintain access to it for a period of time. The teen told investigators he met Williams in a Snapchat group for gay teen males. Soon after they became chatting, Williams reached out to the teen, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and offered to make in-app purchases of online video game in exchange for nude pictures. Okay. Apparently, the nude teen in Oklahoma didn't mind so much for a while because he made a considerable amount of money on there. An investigation by the FBI found that a 12-year-old was also approached or engaged somehow with Williams online, and he too was engaged to exchange nude pictures and videos, according to the DOJ. Okay, so this went on for a while where he was able to do these various things. Okay, what's curious about this is that you have an exchange going on here. You have an exchange between adolescents and a man for goods and services. And again, I don't want to cheapen this. I don't want to say that it is not anything important. It certainly is, but it's interesting how they go about this. Investigators say Williams sent the victim nearly $1,000. So this teenager, over, I don't know, 18-month period, received a little bit of money for this. Okay. One teenager was involved with his 10-year-old stepbrother online, and Williams directed the scene. And since he had reached his Cash App transaction limit, he put a debit card inside a pair of shoes and sent that to the kid. I don't know why the parents weren't there apparently to see that for whatever reason. If my son received a pair of shoes from an unknown party, I'd want to know where that came from. And here to this individual, Williams paid $3,500 for nude images and videos of the teen and his stepbrother, the 10-year-old, over a 6-month period. Okay, $3,000 to another teenager and his boyfriend. He spent a total of $10,000, and he faces 15 to 30 years in prison when one of the boys apparently ratted him out. Again, I'm not saying that this is okay. I'm not defending the boys or defending the man. I'm simply saying it's interesting how teenagers are savvy enough to see that there's a certain degree of transaction involved with it. Okay. There's a transaction involved. And it's interesting to me that when I retired, I started thinking, when I was forced out, I started thinking about little conversations I had heard along the way. When you have no job early on, you have time to think about this. And it's amazing, before I ever busted the coach at Brentsville District High School who was having sex with 2 of my students, drugging them and having sex with them. And I discovered it despite what the news media, since I left the place, the resource officer rushed to the fore and claimed that he had done it. He had nothing to do with any of it until well after the fact. What's interesting about this is you get bits and pieces that you later on piece together. And I distinctly remember several conversations where some people all but admitted that they were having some kind of relationship, these were girls in particular, with older people. And there was always a benefit involved, whether it was money or tickets to something or some kind of equivalent benefit. There are articles all over the internet with older people, young adults, doing the same thing in order to afford college. It's very difficult to understand from this article where its bias is totally on abuse to ask yourself, what actually is going on here? Okay. What actually is going on with the transaction? Did this 15-year-old who finally turned him into the FBI suddenly say to himself, maybe he's asking for more than I want to deliver, or maybe he won't stop, or maybe he wants to escalate the type of images that he wants to see. But what's interesting here is the number of what are the statistics? Let's look at the statistics of what actually is out there. So we can look here at the a couple of different charts here. Let's look at the Lancet Child and Adolescent Health. Now, they did a literature search through 6 UN languages: Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, Spanish, and looked in their multiple databases and what between 2010 2023. And what they found in their research is that online solicitation was ranged with I'm sorry, didn't range 12 point were approximately 12.5% of all of these samples that they looked at. Online solicitation was covered in the literature, and the coverage in the literature, okay, that they dealt with suggested that 12.5% of the people were solicitation cases. And about 12.6 were non-consensual, basically stealing of photos and images, etc. Right? Sexual extortion was approximately 3.5%, but that apparently is on the rise. Okay. The mean prevalence of past year recall of all this sort of thing, according to OCSEA, which stands for Online Child Sexual Exploitation and Abuse, okay, was 8.1%. Okay, right here, 8.1%. So that's kind of curious too. So according to the Lancet, which is a British publication, I believe, you have approximately 12.5% of cases online had to do with online solicitation. Let's look at a finding from another one. This is social epidemiology of online dating in the US among early adolescents. And this is 2024. Okay. What's interesting about this is it demonstrated that overall 0.4% of participants reported ever using a dating app. So a lot of these studies, you'll notice, speak to their data coming from surveys where they have to talk to kids. And kids sometimes lie. But what we also know is that kids will show up with blank profiles. They'll just hang out there. They will look around. They will exchange some talk. They will not necessarily post any pictures. And then they will ghost the person and they will disappear off the app. Okay. That has also happened out there. So the degree to which children mitigate their own risk, or perhaps in the case of this Smyth County vice chair of the school board, they negotiated for stuff they wanted. 0.4% reported ever using a dating app, right? And of those, higher numbers of children were actually on there. So the influence of real-time location-based dating apps, the introduction tell us, has reshaped the landscape. Approximately 25 to 39% of newly formed couples met through online dating apps, which would fly in the face of what probation officers and law enforcement tell us, which is that they're only adult hookup sites and nobody does anything but hook up for sex on there. Not true. There's a wide variety of reasons. As Bumble, the online dating app, also found during COVID, particularly, people were very, very interested in friendship. They were not interested in sex. They were interested in just developing friendship. Now, where that would go from there, who knows? Okay. But one study of US adolescents and young adults here, 13 to 24 years, found that 19% of adults under 18 reported using them, compared to 38% with young adults. So that would square a little bit with what the Lancet also had of the year or two before. Okay. And these are mean ages. Another study of adolescents in urban environments, the average age 17 years, found that 10% had initiated a romantic relationship online. Okay. Just 10%. All right. And, it goes on to disaggregate some particular um, data. But what's interesting about these cases is that none of them talk about this rampant exploitation of children like we keep hearing from the media and from the police. It certainly happens. But when they're talking about exploitation, what are they talking about exactly? Okay, because not all of these cases are they necessarily exploitative in the same way, okay, or even at all. If you have children on there who are using adults to get stuff and they never meet those adults, how exploitative is it? I think is a fair enough question on there. You certainly can argue that children are being harmed at some point, and very often you hear that from psychologists and others. But at the same time, when you talk to these former children who are now adults and you ask them, and I'm communicating with some around the world, they say a very different thing. They say, I wasn't exploited. I was the exploiter. And I can't discount that any more than I can discount any research from the police. There's evidence on both sides. My point is, it's not always skewed the way you will hear it in the media all the time. It also brings up an interesting comparison with the sex stings, because what happened with this man who was the chairman of the school board sort of happens on sex sites too. Sex stings, excuse me. Police lure an adult by pretending first to be an adult and then switch to a child. Okay, they act like the Smyth County guy did, reaching out to people all over the internet by preying on a very vulnerable area of the internet where people are engaged in these complex relationships, some of which go into a sexual realm, some of it has to do with role play, where people take on roles and behave in ways that they would never do face to face in real life. And in these sex stings, of course, they pretend to be children after getting the attention of the adult pretending to be adult, and they flip the script. And in effect, they're pimping children online. So they're creating online a very interesting dynamic where, in effect, they're helping to exploit children. Law enforcement is by pretending to be children. And if you're not a pedophile, you might hear about this and gravitate to those sites. So, in a way, aren't you creating some of the same result that you're claiming that you're trying to stop? Why don't you just go on that site and hang out there, pretend to be a child, and wait for somebody to approach you? Why don't you do that? Instead, you know that there are kids on there, and there's some evidence that the kids are more savvy and that they're less interested in sex or sexual relationships. You saw 0.4% in that one study. So, nowhere in this story are they hanging out rescuing children who are idly sitting on these sex sites. And again, how did they find out with this Smyth guy? This 15-year-old who had collected $3,500 or whatever it was, ratted on this guy. We don't know why he did that. Why did he collect all that money first? $10,000 these kids got, and then turned the person in. There had to have been catalysts there. All right. And it just seems very interesting that you don't take into account the savviness of children. You don't take into account different ages of children. You don't take into account that children are exploring their sexuality and their world and their relationships through this online portal like they used to do just face to face, before the internet. You don't take into account any of those issues. And you don't take into account that when police take this information and warp it and twist it and go online to do their sex things, that they are in effect feeding this same presence of children online, regardless of whether we can agree as to why they're on the sites and what they're doing on the site. The police, you can argue, are making it far, far worse. So I want you to just think about those issues. Hit me back in comments if you have anything to say about that. I look forward to getting your remarks. And you have a good day. This is Norman Michaelation with ICAC Unpacked, April 8th, 2025. Have a good day.